Hey, good morning, all. I hope everybody's doing good. We're going to go over section 9.9 today. I talked a little bit in the beginning of Monday that the schedule here, and I just want to kind of reiterate it. So Tuesday, your assignment was due. Today is Wednesday. We'll go over section 9.9. And then that homework will be due Thursday. Nothing Friday. There's no school period, and we'll pick back up Monday, and we'll basically review over section 9.8 and 9.9, and then we will have our quiz. I believe that will be on, I have to double check, but I believe it'll be on Thursday. For that, we'll review Monday and Wednesday, or maybe it'll be actually be Wednesday. We'll see, but I'll let you know for sure. But that's kind of where we're at from section 9.8, the homework. And I just kind of want to go over that. Now, what I'll do is I'll post this on the actual homework assignment as well, and then we'll go over it the next class. But here's going to be your answers. When you're completing the square, oh, let me get rid of me now. Remember, you take half of that b value, and then you square it, and that's what goes into that spot, and that allows us to do 6 times 6 is 36, 6 plus 6 is 12, and it gives us a quantity squared. Okay, so that's what we want to complete the square to help us solve some of these equations. When we get down here to solving the equations, we always want to add, we take the constant, needs to be on this side, and then we add a term to make our left side factor into something squared. In this case here, half of 2 is 1. 1 squared is 1, and that's what goes in each of those spots. So for number 5, you should get an answer of 1, -3. Now, I know I normally write the smaller number first, but I was just kind of running out of room, and I just kind of went in order. So that most of these, the smaller number may not be first, and if you did the same thing, that would be fine. So 7, you get -1, -13 for your answers. 8 is 1, 5. Now, you notice there's a good bit of work here, and you don't have, a couple of these steps aren't absolutely necessary. I put them down just because of it's the notes, and so you can look and see where you made a mistake. But you need to have most of this. You should not, there's absolutely no way you should just have this answer sitting right here. You have to have this work detailing what's going on. 8, you get the answer 1, 5. 9, I get the answer 6, -4. 2 answers. 10, which should be 21 and 1. 11, I end up with -8 and -2, or yes, and then -4, 12 for number 12. Okay, if you have questions, if you're not getting these, this is when you hop on the Canvas conferences. We can go over those, kind of give you a hand. We'll do some extra ones as well. All right, in section 9.9, we're still solving quadratic equations, but we're going to do it another way. This is a third way. We've had factoring, we've had completing the square, and now we've had the third way, which is called the quadratic formula. For some of you, this may be the easiest. Okay, we're not going to worry about the number of solutions at this point. Okay, we're just solving it. All right, the first thing we did was learn how to factor. And let's just real quick review. To factor something, we look for two numbers to multiply to equal -8 and adds together to equal -3. Well, what are those two numbers? Well, to multiply to -8, you got -1 and 8. You got -2 and 4. And we can switch the order and make it +1 times -8 and +2 times -4. First one adds a 7. Next one adds a 2. Next one adds a -7. Next one adds a -2. Nothing adds a -3. This is not factorable, but it doesn't mean it doesn't have a solution. So factoring doesn't work for every quadratic. The completing the square and what we're going to call the quadratic root formula, they will work for everything. Okay. And so that's why we need the quadratic formula. Factoring does not work for everything. Completing a square, quite honestly, is not a lot of fun. It's probably the hardest of the ones. So we're going to come up with a new way. All right, here's your quadratic formula. At first, it's going to be pretty daunting, but in reality, when we get to use it, it's not that bad. If you have your equation in this form, okay, that would be like 3x squared plus 7x plus 2 equals 0. Then this formula here, and I like to work, instead of negative b, I like to say the opposite of b, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c over 2 times a. Well, what's a, b, and c? A is the number in front of the x squared. So in that case, it would be 3. B is the number in front of the x, would be 7. And c is the number in front of, or just the constant, it would be 2. And then you would plug those in. Now there's a good bit of math that goes behind this formula. We're not going to be concerned with that right now. You'll get that into a little bit later on in high school. We'll worry about how we get it. But right now, we're just going to use it. If one of these is missing, you let that term be a 0. If there's no x term, you let b equal 0. If there's no constant, you let c equal 2 or 0. You have to have an a to use the quadratic formula, but you don't have to have a b or c. What that allows us to do, and we'll get to it in a second, that allows us to solve a problem that's not factorable, and kind of we'll go through that. All right, let's just hop into it. I need to pull up my calculator so that I have it available. And also, as I should have said earlier, there's guided notes for this. Those should have been printed out so that you can use those to solve these. Okay, some of these can be solved by more than one way. Some can be solved by factoring, some can be solved by completing a square. We are going to use, you have to follow directions. We're going to use a quadratic formula. Key thing for the quadratic formula, it has to equal 0. Okay, make sure it equals 0. This one does before we start. I would write down the quadratic formula for every problem until you know it by heart. So the quadratic formula is the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus, that should be a 4 ac all over 2a. Now, a, b, and c are very important. A is the number in front of the x squared. Remember, when there's no constant written, there's a 1. B is the number in front of x. In this case, it would be a negative 1. And c is the constant. Here it's going to be negative 20. You've got to take the signs as well. Now it's a case of substituting in and just simplifying and solving. All right, the opposite of b. Well, b is negative 1. The opposite of negative 1 is positive 1. Okay, huge step here. And so you make sure that you put negative 1 in parentheses, because if you don't, if you square, you're going to end up getting the wrong number in here. Minus 4, a is 1, c is negative 20. All over 2 times 1. All right, what the best step now is to do is take and figure out what goes in the parentheses. Multiply that all together. And don't worry about the, not the parentheses, it's under the square root. Don't worry about the square root yet. So put negative 1 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 20. Okay, that gives me 81. So x equals 1 plus or minus the square root of 81 divided by 2. All right, now here's the big step. And it's going to tell us how we're going to go different routes here. But square root of 81, if that's a nice number, if it's a whole number, that is kind of a good thing. Square root of 81 is 9. So now what this becomes is 1 plus or minus 9 divided by 2. So I can finish this. This is pretty similar to what we did with completing the square. So you got two cases. The first case is 1 plus 9 divided by 2. And the second case is 1 minus 9 divided by 2. Well, 1 plus 9 is 10. 10 divided by 2 is 5. 1 minus 9 is negative 8. Negative 8 divided by 2 is negative 4. So you do 1 plus 9, which is 10, divided by 2, which is 5. And we do 1 minus 9, which is negative 8, divided by 2 is negative 4. And so I get two answers, negative 4 and 5. Okay, so it doesn't matter which one. If I plug in 5, it's going to make that true. If I plug in negative 4, it'll make that true. And let me just do one of those, because we haven't spent a lot of time checking answers, and you should understand how that works. So we had x squared minus x minus 20. Just pay attention to this. You really don't have room to write this down. If x equals 5, I'm telling you that's going to make this true. 5 squared minus 5 minus 20 should equal 0. 5 squared is 25. 25 minus 5 is 20. 20 minus 20 is 0. So that works. Also, negative 4 works. Might as well just throw that in there for a second. You got to put negative 4 in parentheses when you square it. Negative 4 squared is positive 16. Minus a negative, remember that's plus. 16 plus 4 is 20. 20 minus 20 is 0. Nothing else will work. Those are the only two numbers that work. You plug in anything else, you won't get back 0. All right, this is how you use a quadratic formula. All right, now we didn't have a number in front of the x squared. Let's put a number in front of here. So, right, I'm going to take a look at A, B, and C. It's important that you identify those for each problem. A is 6. B is 5. C is negative 4. If it equals 0, I can go ahead and proceed to the quadratic root formula, which is the opposite of B, plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. Now it's a case of substituting in and just making sure we don't do any mistakes with the math. Opposite of B, B is 5. That becomes a negative 5. 5 squared. If there's no negative, I don't absolutely have to have parentheses. It never hurts, though, to have them. A is 6. C is negative 4. Really got to watch your positives and negatives here. And then 2 times A becomes 2 times 6. All right, figure out what goes underneath the square root. Don't worry about the square root yet. Just take 5 squared minus 4 times 6 times negative 4. And we get 121. 2 times 6 is 12. All right, the square root of 121. At this point, figure out what is underneath the square root. You may know if it's a whole number. It may not be a whole number. All right, that is 11. So now, once you take the square root, you no longer, right, it becomes just an 11. Not a square root of 11, just an 11. All right, now at this point, you have to break it up into the two cases. The first case is negative 5 plus 11 divided by 12. The second case is negative 5 minus 11 divided by 12. And I need to simplify. Negative 5 plus 11. Okay, negative 5 plus 11 is positive 6. Negative 5 minus 11 is negative 16. Okay, these are not whole numbers. Let's leave them as fractions. 6 over 12 reduces to 1/2. All right, what's negative 16 over 12 reduced to? What goes into both of them? Biggest number would be 4, and then you're going to get negative 4/3. So here's my two answers. -4/3 and 1/2. Okay, -4/3 and 1/2. This would be a little bit tougher one to check because you're dealing with fractions, but if you plugged in 1/2, you'd get back 0. And if I plugged in -4/3, I'd get back 0. Okay, as long as I didn't make any mistakes in here, those got to be my two answers, and they are. So -4/3 and 1/2. Okay, let's take a look at C here. All right, this is going to turn out slightly different. X squared plus 3x minus 7 equals 0. All right, I'm going to take 1 second and just pause this. Okay. X squared plus 3x minus 7 equals 0. We're great. A equals 1, B equals +3, and C equals -7. All right, here's your quadratic formula. X equals the opposite of B, plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. Now we're going to substitute in X equals, all right, -B. Opposite of B, -3, plus or minus B squared, which is 3 squared minus 4 times 1 times -7 over 2 times 1. All right, what is underneath the square root? Figure that out. It is 3 squared minus 4 times 1 times -7, which is 37 over 2. All right, now here's where we're going to run into something that's a little bit different. Because in each time I said take the square root of that value. What is the square root of 37? It is not that's not a whole number. Okay, it is not. So when we come into this situation where it doesn't end up being a whole number, okay, let me go backwards here. So for B, square root of 120 was 11. You just reduce that into the two fractions. For this one here, we had the square root of 81, which is 9. Okay, no more radical. Worked out to a nice whole number. We come up to nice whole number answers. All right, what's going to happen here is we're going to come up with two sets of answers. I'm going to have the radical answer, and I'm going to have the decimal answer. Okay, at this point, that is my radical answer because it doesn't come out to a whole number. And I would say the radical, because it contains the radical, this is also what we call the exact answer. You're going to write as -3 plus or minus square root of 37 over 2. But now we can also come down to the decimal answer and kind of get, so it looks a little bit more what we're used to. All right, the square root of 37. We are going to round to the nearest hundredth on that radical. So it's going to be -3 plus or minus, all right, square root of 37, 6.082. The nearest hundredth would be 6.08 divided by 2. And now we're going to do like we did on the last one. We're going to break it up into the two cases. The first case is -3 plus 6.08. And then the other case is -3 minus 6.08 divided by 2. All right, well, what is negative? Let me clear this. What's -3 plus 6.08? All right, make sure you hit equals first and then divided by 2. Okay, I get 1.54. All right, if you do -3 plus 6.08 divided by 2, it's going to go out of order and going to give you the wrong answer. That is not the right answer. 1.54 is the right answer. Second case here, I got -3 minus 6.08. Okay, hit equals, divided by 2, and I get -4.54. So now the decimal answers are negative 4.54 and 1.54. Okay. So you got a radical answer and you got a decimal answer. Okay. Only when the square root of the number is not a whole number. If that comes out to a nice number, then we will just have either whole numbers or fractions. We will not have a radical answer. Okay. Now let's do one more with a radical and a decimal answer. And also take a look at this one. How is this one different than the other three? The other three all equaled 0. The other three all equaled 0. Okay, so we have to make it 0. Okay, what do we have to do to make that equal to 0? We have to add 1 to both sides. Now make sure you always keep it in that descending order, where we put the x squared first, whatever the x term is next, and then the constant is last. So now it equals 0. Now you can use the quadratic formula. A is not b. A is 2. B is negative 8. C is 1. So now x equals the opposite of b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. I'm going to substitute in. The opposite of negative 8 is 8. Okay, make sure when you take b squared, you put negative 8 in parentheses, squared minus 4 times a, which is 2, times c, which is positive 1, over 2 times a, which is 2. All right, figure out what's underneath the radical. So in parentheses, negative 8 squared minus 4 times 2 times 1 gives me 56. So I have 8 plus or minus square root of 56 over 4. Okay, at this point, we take the square root of the 56. It is not a whole number. So that means that I'm going to have a radical answer, and that means I'm going to have a decimal answer. The radical answer is whatever you have at this point. It would be x equals, and you can just leave it as plus or minus square root of 56 over 4. That's your radical answer. Now to get the decimal answer, here's where we have to go further. Well, the square root of 56, rounded to the nearest hundredth, we got 7.483. You look at the third number, it's less than 5, so it stays the same. So this becomes x equals 8 plus or minus 7.48 divided by 4. And now we go into the two cases, and I get x equals 8 plus 7.48 divided by 4. And x equals 8 minus 7.48 divided by 4. All right, let's see what we get here. 8 plus 7.48. It equals, divided by 4, 3.87. Eight minus 7.48 divided by 4. 0.13. Those are your decimal answers. So I go back up to here. I get x equals 0.13. And what was the other one? 3.87. Okay. All right, there's your quadratic formula for that. Now I'll be on the conferences if you need help. Go through those problems. Here's your homework assignment. Page 657, 2 through 12 even. Okay. Write the original problem down. and show your work. Now, give you a little bit of hint, for 8, 10, and 12, they will have a decimal and a radical answer. 8, 10, and 12 will have a radical and decimal answer. So that means when you take the square root of that number, it will not be a whole number. Okay. Okay. So today's Wednesday. You have till Thursday at midnight to turn this in, and then there's no school on Friday. And then I'll talk to you on Monday. I don't think I'll see you on Monday, although I'll show my face. I don't know if I'll see your face. All right. Have a great weekend. Thanks for listening.